I woke up on a Tuesday morning in mid-January to find my mailbox completely buried under 3 feet of packed snow, and standing in my driveway with a smug expression was Brenda Winters, the HOA president, leaning on her snow shovel like she had just won the lottery. The thing about living in Traverse City, Michigan, is that winter hits hard and fast. We get lake effect snow from Lake Michigan that can dump 2 feet overnight without warning. Most people around here know how to handle it. You clear your driveway, clear your walkway, and you definitely clear around your mailbox because the postal carriers need access. It's common sense and also federal law, but apparently Brenda didn't care about either. I pulled on my boots and coat and headed outside into the bitter cold. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees, and the wind coming off the lake made it feel even worse. Brenda was still standing there, watching me approach with this satisfied look on her face that made my blood boil despite the freezing air. "Morning, Jason," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I gestured at my mailbox, which was now part of a massive snow pile that extended at least 4 feet in every direction. "What the hell is this, Brenda?" "Oh, that." She glanced at the snow pile like she was noticing it for the first time. "I was clearing my driveway and had to put the snow somewhere. Your mailbox happened to be the most convenient spot." "You buried my mailbox on purpose," I said, my breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "The postal carrier can't access it like this." Brenda shrugged, adjusting her purple puffy coat. "Then I guess you better start digging. By the way, I noticed your Christmas lights are still up. According to HOA rules, all holiday decorations must be removed by January 10th. It's now January 15th. That's a $50 fine per day." I had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years, and in that time, Brenda had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. It started small with warnings about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, then escalated to citations for parking my truck in my own driveway because she claimed it was commercial looking, even though it was just a regular Ford F-150 that I used for work. I was a carpenter, and apparently that offended her suburban sensibilities. "My lights have been down since January 8th, I said. "I have photos with timestamps to prove it." "I saw lights on your house last night," Brenda insisted, pulling out her phone. "In fact, I took a picture." She showed me the screen. It was a blurry photo of my house with what might have been a tiny gleam of light near my front window. "That's my porch light," I said. "My regular porch light that stays on all year." "Looks like a Christmas light to me," Brenda said, putting her phone away. "The fine stands. You'll receive official notification by the end of the week." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "You can't just block my mailbox, Brenda. That's actually a federal offense. Mail carriers need clear access. Sue me," she said, and then she actually laughed. "Oh wait, you already tried that, didn't you? How did that work out for you?" She was referring to the lawsuit I had filed 6 months ago against the HOA for harassment and selective enforcement. The judge had dismissed it on a technicality, because I hadn't followed the proper grievance procedure outlined in the HOA bylaws, which required submitting a formal complaint to the board and waiting 30 days for a response before taking legal action. It cost me $3,000 in legal fees and got me absolutely nowhere except on Brenda's permanent bad side. "I'm warning you," I said. "Move the snow away from my mailbox." "Or what?" Brenda stepped closer, and I could smell coffee on her breath. "You going to threaten me, Jason?" "Because I have my phone right here ready to call the police. I'm sure they'd love to hear about how you're intimidating a woman half your size. I'm 6'2" and about 200 pounds. Brenda was maybe 5'4" and definitely used her size as a weapon whenever it suited her. I stepped back, holding up my hands. I'm not threatening anyone, I said. I'm just asking you to move the snow. And I'm declining your request, Brenda said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy day ahead. HOA board meeting tonight in case you forgot. We'll be discussing your ongoing violations. She walked back toward her house, which was 3 doors down from mine on Maple Ridge Drive. I stood there in the freezing cold, staring at my buried mailbox. The mail truck usually came around 2 in the afternoon. I could dig it out myself, but that wasn't the point. Brenda had deliberately done this to mess with me, and I was tired of being her punching bag. I went back inside and made myself some coffee while I thought about my options. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I had bought with the last of my savings after my divorce. The HOA fees were steep at $300 a month, but the neighborhood was safe and close to my workshop downtown. I didn't want to move, but I also couldn't keep living under Brenda's tyranny. After my second cup of coffee, I remembered something a friend had told me years ago. He had dealt with a neighbor who kept blocking his mailbox, and he'd reported it to the postal inspector. Apparently, interfering with mail delivery is a serious federal crime, and postal inspectors don't mess around. I grabbed my phone and searched for the United States Postal Inspection Service website. Sure enough, there was a whole section about mail delivery obstruction. I clicked on the link to file a complaint and started filling out the form. The form asked for detailed information about the incident, including photos. I bundled back up and went outside with my phone, taking pictures of the snow pile from every angle. I made sure to capture how completely buried the mailbox was and how far the snow extended into what was clearly the postal carrier's access area. I also took photos of Brenda's driveway, which was perfectly clear, and her own mailbox, which was easily accessible. Back inside, I uploaded the photos and wrote a detailed description of what happened, including the fact that Brenda had admitted to deliberately placing the snow there and had refused to move it when asked. I hit submit and got a confirmation message saying that my complaint had been received and would be investigated. I felt a small surge of satisfaction, but I knew better than to celebrate too early. Brenda had connections in the community. Her husband was a retired lawyer, and her best friend was married to the police chief. She always seemed to wiggle out of consequences. Still, I grabbed my snow shovel and went back outside. The mail truck would be here in a few hours, and I wasn't going to let my postal carrier suffer because of Brenda's petness. It took me 45 minutes of hard work to clear enough snow away from the mailbox to make it accessible. My shoulders were burning and my fingers were numb by the time I finished. As I was putting my shovel away, my neighbor from across the street, an older man named Walter Peterson, came over. Walter was in his 70s and had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, long before the HOA became the monster it was now. "Saw what Brenda did," Walter said, shaking his head. "That woman gets worse every year." "Tell me about it," I said, flexing my sore hands. "You know, it wasn't always like this," Walter said. "When my wife and I first moved here, the HOA was actually reasonable. They kept the common areas maintained, organized a few neighborhood events, that sort of thing. Then Brenda joined the board about 8 years ago, and everything changed." "How so?" I asked, curious to hear the history. "She started pushing for more and more rules," Walter explained. "Every meeting she'd propose some new restriction or fine. Some of us tried to vote her out, but she's got this core group of supporters who always back her up. Now she pretty much runs the whole board like her personal kingdom." "There has to be something we can do," I said. Walter shrugged. "People have tried. Remember the Hendersons? They fought back against one of her fines, and Brenda made their lives so miserable that they eventually just sold their house and moved. Lost money on the sale too, because Brenda made sure to tell potential buyers about all their violations. That was depressing but not surprising. I had seen how Brenda operated. She was relentless when she decided someone was her enemy. "Well, I filed a complaint with the Postal Inspection Service," I said. "Maybe that'll do something." Walter's eyes widened. "The federal postal inspectors, those guys don't play around. My nephew works for USPS, and he says they take mail interference very seriously." "That's what I'm hoping," I said. Walter clapped me on the shoulder. "Good for you, son. It's about time someone stood up to her using something she can't control." The mail truck arrived at 1:30 that afternoon. I watched from my window as Carmen Rodriguez, our regular postal carrier, pulled up to my mailbox. She was able to access it without any problems thanks to my shoveling, and she drove on without incident. I made a note of the time in case I needed it for my complaint. That evening was the HOA board meeting, which were held monthly in the community center at the entrance of our subdivision. I normally avoided these meetings like the plague because they were just Brenda's stage for her power trips, but tonight I decided to attend. I wanted to see how she acted, and I wanted witnesses to be there if she said anything incriminating. The community center was a small brick building with a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived at 7 o'clock, there were about 15 residents scattered across the folding chairs. The board sat at a long table at the front, Brenda in the center as president, with Thomas Miller as vice president on her right and Janet Crawford as secretary on her left. The treasurer position had been vacant since the last person quit in frustration 3 months ago. Brenda's eyes locked onto me the moment I walked in, and her pleasant expression soured. "Jason Newman," she said loudly. "How nice of you to join us. Here to discuss your violations, I hope." "Just here to observe," I said, taking a seat in the back row next to Walter, who gave me a subtle nod. "Very well," Brenda said, shuffling her papers. "Let's begin. First order of business, snow removal responsibilities. As you all know, we've had significant snowfall this month, and I want to remind everyone that property owners are responsible for clearing their own driveways and walkways within 24 hours of snowfall cessation." A hand went up in the third row. It was Margaret Chen, a teacher who lived 2 streets over. "What about the common areas?" she asked. "The entrance hasn't been plowed in 3 days." "We're working on getting a contractor," Thomas said. He was a balding man in his 50s who always seemed nervous around Brenda. "Our previous company raised their rates, so we're looking for alternatives. In the meantime, be careful driving in and out," Brenda added. "Next item, holiday decoration compliance. I'm pleased to report that most residents removed their decorations on time this year. However, we do have a few stragglers." She looked directly at me. "Jason Newman still has not paid his fines for late removal, totaling $250 as of today." "My decorations were removed on time," I said calmly. "I have documentation." "Your documentation is irrelevant," Brenda said. "I personally observed lights on your property past the deadline." "My porch light is not a holiday decoration," I said. "It's a standard exterior light fixture that operates year-round." "The board has determined otherwise," Brenda said. "The fine stands unless paid within 10 days, at which point late fees will begin accruing at 10% per month." I bit my tongue. Getting into an argument here wouldn't help my case. I made a mental note to document everything and possibly consult with a lawyer again, even though that hadn't worked out well last time. The meeting dragged on for another hour, covering topics like landscaping standards for spring, parking regulations, and a proposal to ban outdoor play equipment in front yards. That last one would affect at least a dozen families with kids, but Brenda was pushing hard for it because she thought swing sets were unsightly. When the meeting finally adjourned, I waited until most people had left before approaching the board table. Brenda was gathering her papers, and she didn't look up when I stopped in front of her. "Brenda, we need to talk about what happened this morning," I said. "I have nothing to discuss with you," she replied, still not looking at me. "You deliberately blocked my mailbox," I said. "That's a federal offense." Now she looked up, and there was that smug expression again. "I cleared my driveway and had to put the snow somewhere. If your mailbox happened to be in the way, that's hardly my fault. Perhaps you should consider relocating it." "Mailboxes are required to be in specific locations per USP's regulations," I said. "Mine is exactly where it's supposed to be." "Then I suppose you have a problem," Brenda said, standing up and gathering her things. "Good night, Jason." I watched her leave, flanked by Thomas and Janet, who hadn't said a word during our exchange. The whole board was either scared of her or in her pocket. There was no winning through official HOA channels. 2 days later, on Thursday morning, I was working in my garage when a black sedan pulled up in front of my house. A woman in a dark coat and badge clipped to her belt got out and walked up my driveway. I recognized the insignia on her badge from the website, United States Postal Inspection Service. "Jason Newman?" she asked, pulling out credentials. "That's me," I said, wiping sawdust off my hands. "I'm Inspector Lisa Matthews with USP's," she said. "I'm here to follow up on your complaint regarding mail delivery obstruction. You have a few minutes to talk." "Absolutely," I said, leading her into my house and offering her coffee, which she declined. We sat at my kitchen table, and Inspector Matthews pulled out a tablet and stylus. She was probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "Walk me through what happened on Tuesday morning," she said. I gave her the full story, starting with waking up to find my mailbox buried and ending with my confrontation with Brenda. Inspector Matthews took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "And you have photos of the obstruction?" she asked. "I do, and I already uploaded them with my complaint," I said. "But I can show you the originals on my phone if you need them." "Please," she said. I pulled up the photos and handed her my phone. She scrolled through them carefully, zooming in on certain details. "These are good," she said. "Clear documentation of complete obstruction. And you said the individual responsible admitted to placing the snow there deliberately?" "She did," I said. "We had a conversation about it." She told me she cleared her driveway and my mailbox was the most convenient place to put the snow. When I asked her to move it, she refused. "Were there any witnesses to this conversation?" Inspector Matthews asked. I thought about it. "I don't think so. It was early and most people were still inside. But my neighbor, Walter Peterson, saw the pile and came over afterward. He can confirm what it looked like." "I'll need his contact information," she said, making a note. We talked for another 20 minutes. Inspector Matthews asked about my history with Brenda and the HOA, which I explained in detail. She seemed particularly interested in the pattern of harassment and selective enforcement. "This isn't the first complaint we've received about HOA officials obstructing mail delivery," she said. "It's becoming more common. People don't realize how seriously we take this. Mail delivery is a constitutional right, and interfering with it carries significant penalties." "What kind of penalties?" I asked. "For intentional obstruction, we're looking at fines up to $5,000 and potentially up to 6 months imprisonment," Inspector Matthews said. "If there's a pattern of behavior or if it's part of a harassment campaign, the penalties can be even more severe." I felt a mix of satisfaction and nervousness. I wanted Brenda to face consequences, but I also didn't want to completely ruin her life. Then again, she had been trying to ruin mine for 3 years. What happens next? I asked. I'll interview the postal carrier who services this route, Inspector Matthews said. I'll also speak with Miss Winters and get her side of the story. Depending on what I find, I'll make a recommendation to the U.S. Attorney's Office on whether to pursue charges. How long does that take? I asked. Typically a few weeks, she said. I'll keep you updated on the progress. In the meantime, if there are any further incidents of obstruction, document them and contact me immediately. She handed me her business card. After Inspector Matthews left, I felt lighter than I had in months. Finally, someone with actual authority was taking my complaint seriously. Someone Brenda couldn't bully or intimidate. I texted Walter to give him a heads up that an inspector might contact him. He texted back almost immediately. Good. Happy to help. That woman needs to be stopped. The next day was Friday, and I was meeting with a client downtown when I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, and when I checked it later, it was from Janet Crawford, the HOA secretary. Mr. Newman, this is Janet Crawford, the message said. She sounded uncomfortable. I need to inform you that the board has called an emergency meeting for Monday evening regarding your conduct. Your attendance is mandatory per HOA bylaws. Please confirm receipt of this message. I called her back and got her voicemail. This is Jason Newman. I got your message about the emergency meeting. Can you tell me what this is regarding specifically? She called back within minutes. The board has received complaints about you harassing the HOA president and filing false reports with federal agencies. We need to address this immediately. False reports, I said, my anger rising. Brenda buried my mailbox with snow. That's not false. That's documented fact. The board will hear your side at the meeting, Janet said. Monday at 7, please be there. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Inspector Matthews and left her a message about the emergency meeting and the accusations of filing false reports. She called me back within the hour. This is classic retaliation behavior, she said. Don't worry about it. You filed a legitimate complaint with documentation. There's nothing false about it. I'd suggest recording the meeting if your state allows it. Michigan is a one-party consent state for recordings, which meant I could record conversations I was part of without telling anyone. I made a note to charge my phone fully and maybe bring a backup recording device. The weekend dragged by slowly. I tried to focus on work and not think about the upcoming meeting, but it was hard. I kept imagining all the ways Brenda might try to twist things or manufacture new violations. On Saturday afternoon, I ran into Margaret Chen at the grocery store. She looked upset, and when she saw me, she pulled her cart over. Jason, I heard about the emergency meeting, she said quietly. I just want you to know that not everyone supports what Brenda's doing. Some of us think she's out of control. Thanks, Margaret, I said. That means a lot. I tried to join the board last year, she continued. Thought maybe I could help moderate things, but Brenda blocked my nomination. Said I didn't have enough experience with property management, which is ridiculous because neither does she. She was a real estate agent for like 2 years, and somehow that makes her an expert. Why do people keep voting for her? I asked. Margaret glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Because she runs unopposed most of the time. Anyone who tries to challenge her gets harassed until they drop out, and she controls who gets to vote on what. Did you know she's changed the bylaws 3 times in the past 5 years? Always at special meetings announced with minimum notice when most people can't attend. This was news to me. That's legal. Technically, yes, if she follows the procedure outlined in the bylaws, Margaret said, but it's definitely not ethical. Some of us have talked about organizing a recall vote, but we'd need signatures from 51% of homeowners, and most people are too scared or apathetic to sign. We talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. It was becoming clear that Brenda's reign of terror extended far beyond just me. She had systematically consolidated power and eliminated opposition, turning what should have been a simple neighborhood organization into her personal fiefdom. Monday evening arrived cold and clear. I bundled up, made sure my phone was fully charged and set to record, and headed to the community center. When I arrived, the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently word had gotten out about the emergency meeting, and people were curious. Inside, every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. I recognized most of the faces as neighbors I'd seen around but never really talked to. Walter was there, along with Margaret and a bunch of others. The atmosphere was tense. Brenda sat at the board table with Thomas and Janet, looking irritated at the turnout. She clearly hadn't expected this many people. "This is a closed board meeting," she announced. "Residents are not permitted to attend." "The bylaws say all board meetings must be open to residents except when discussing specific legal matters," someone called out. I turned and saw it was David Kumar, a lawyer who lived on Pine Street. Brenda's face reddened. "This is a disciplinary matter." "Disciplinary matters against residents must be conducted in open session unless the resident requests privacy," David said calmly. "I have the bylaws right here if you'd like me to read the relevant section." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but too many people were watching. "Fine," she snapped. "Everyone sit down and be quiet." I took a seat in the second row and Walter sat next to me. I had my phone in my jacket pocket, recording. "This emergency meeting has been called to address serious misconduct by Jason Newman," Brenda began, reading from a prepared statement. "Mr. Newman has engaged in a pattern of harassment toward board members, including verbal threats and filing false reports with federal agencies, in an attempt to intimidate and defame the HOA president." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I forced myself to stay calm. "These actions violate multiple HOA covenants regarding respectful conduct and bringing the community into disrepute," Brenda continued. "The board is considering sanctions up to and including forced sale of Mr. Newman's property." "That's insane," I said, standing up. "You can't force me to sell my house because I filed a legitimate complaint." "Sit down, Mr. Newman," Brenda said. "You'll have a chance to speak." "No, I'll speak now," I said. "Everything you just said is a lie. I never threatened you. I asked you to move snow away from my mailbox, which you deliberately placed there. When you refused, I exercised my right to file a complaint with the appropriate federal agency. That's not harassment. That's following the law." "You're disrupting this meeting," Brenda said. "Security, please escort Mr. Newman out." "There is no security," Walter said loudly, "and you can't kick him out of his own disciplinary hearing." "This is not a hearing, it's a board meeting," Janet said, speaking for the first time. "Then what's he being disciplined for?" Margaret called out. The meeting was devolving into chaos. People were shouting questions. Brenda was banging a gavel she'd apparently brought for the occasion, and Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Everyone calmed down. David Kumar stood up, and his lawyer voice cut through the noise. "Let me make something very clear. The HOA does not have the authority to force a property sale based on a resident filing complaints with government agencies. That would be a violation of First Amendment rights and would open the HOA to significant legal liability." "Mr. Kumar, you are not a resident of this community," Brenda said. "Actually, I am," David said. I bought the house on Pine Street 3 months ago. And as a resident, I'm formally requesting a copy of all HOA bylaws, financial records, and board meeting minutes for the past 5 years, as is my right under the governing documents. Brenda's face went pale. That request must be submitted in writing. I submitted it 2 weeks ago via certified mail, David said. I have the delivery confirmation. You have 30 days to comply per Michigan statute. I was starting to enjoy this. Brenda had clearly not expected organized opposition. This meeting is over, Brenda said, gathering her papers. No, it's not, I said. You called an emergency meeting to discuss my misconduct. Let's discuss it. You blocked my mailbox with snow. You admitted it. That's a federal crime. I reported it. Those are the facts. I did not block your mailbox, Brenda said. I cleared my driveway. Where I put the snow from my own property is my business. Not when it obstructs mail delivery, I said. The postal inspector has already interviewed me. She'll be interviewing you too if she hasn't already. Brenda's expression changed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I've spoken to no such person. You will, I said. Federal investigations take time, but they are thorough. Is this true? Thomas asked, looking at Brenda. Did you actually block his mailbox? I cleared my driveway, Brenda insisted. I'm not responsible for where the snow ended up. You told me directly that you put it there because it was convenient, I said. I have multiple witnesses who saw the pile. The postal inspector has photos. This is ridiculous, Brenda said, but she was losing her confidence. The board will reconvene when cooler heads prevail. This meeting is adjourned. She stood up and started walking toward the exit. Brenda, wait, Janet said. We need to discuss this properly. There's nothing to discuss, Brenda snapped. These people are staging a mutiny and I won't be part of it. She walked out, leaving Thomas and Janet sitting at the table looking lost. The room erupted in conversation. People were forming small groups, discussing what they'd just witnessed. Several came up to me to offer support. Walter clapped me on the shoulder. That was something, he said. I've never seen her run away like that. David Kumar approached me with his hand extended. I'm glad you stood up to her. She's been operating without oversight for too long. Thanks for the backup, I said, shaking his hand. I didn't know you were a lawyer. Corporate law mostly, David said. But I know enough about HOA law to recognize abuse when I see it. I bought my house without realizing what a nightmare the HOA was. Now I'm stuck here, so I might as well try to fix things. What do we do now? Margaret asked, joining our conversation. We organize, David said. Get enough signatures for a recall vote. Maybe push for a full audit of HOA finances while we're at it. I'm willing to bet Brenda hasn't been as careful with the books as she should be. Over the next hour, we formed an impromptu coalition. David agreed to serve as legal advisor. Margaret volunteered to organize a petition drive. And I offered my house as a meeting place since we couldn't count on accessing the community center. About 20 residents joined our group, exchanging phone numbers and email addresses. As I drove home that night, I felt hopeful for the first time in years. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The next morning, I got a call from Inspector Matthews. I attempted to interview Miss Winters yesterday, she said. She refused to speak with me and referred me to her attorney. That's her right, isn't it? I asked. It is, Inspector Matthews said, but it's also notable. Innocent people generally cooperate with investigations. I've interviewed your postal carrier, Carmen Rodriguez, and she confirmed that she's encountered blocked mailboxes on your street multiple times this winter. She's filed reports with her supervisor. So, what happens now? I asked. I'm completing my investigation and will submit my report to the U.S. Attorney's Office by the end of the week, she said. Based on what I've found, I'll be recommending charges for willful obstruction of mail delivery. My heart rate picked up. Actual criminal charges. Yes, Inspector Matthews said. The evidence is clear. Miss Winters deliberately obstructed your mailbox, admitted to doing so, and refused to remedy the situation. When you reported it through proper channels, she retaliated by attempting to initiate HOA sanctions against you. That pattern of behavior demonstrates intent. Wow, I said. I didn't think it would actually go this far. Federal mail crimes are taken very seriously, Inspector Matthews reminded me. The mail system is foundational to our democracy and commerce. People who interfere with it face real consequences. We talked for a few more minutes, and she reminded me to contact her if any other incidents occurred. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, processing what I'd just heard. Brenda was going to face criminal charges, federal criminal charges. Part of me felt guilty. Yes, she'd made my life miserable, but prison seemed extreme. Then I reminded myself that she'd brought this on herself through her own actions and attitude. She could have just moved the snow. She could have apologized. Instead, she doubled down and tried to destroy me through the HOA. That afternoon, I got an angry voicemail from Brenda's husband, Richard Winters. "My wife is being harassed by federal agents because of your lies," his message said. "You're going to regret this, Newman. We'll sue you for defamation, malicious prosecution, and anything else our lawyer can think of. You'll lose your house and everything you own." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Inspector Matthews with a note. "More retaliation." She replied quickly, "Thank you. This supports the pattern. Please save all communications from the Winters family or their associates." The rest of the week was quiet. I focused on work, putting the finishing touches on a custom cabinet set for a client in Sutton's Bay. It felt good to work with my hands and create something tangible instead of dealing with HOA drama. On Friday afternoon, David Kumar called me. "I've been going through the HOA financial records that Janet finally sent me," he said. "There are some significant irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "The HOA collected approximately $90,000 in fees last year from the roughly 25 homes in our subdivision," David explained. "But I can only account for about $50,000 in documented expenses. There's $40,000 that's just listed as administrative costs and community improvements with no receipts or detailed breakdown." "You think Brenda's been stealing money?" I asked. "I think there needs to be a formal audit," David said carefully. "I'm not making accusations, but the lack of documentation is concerning, especially since Brenda has signing authority on the HOA bank accounts without any oversight." "Can you request an audit?" I asked. "I can propose one at the next board meeting," David said. "Or we can include it as part of the recall petition. Actually, that might be better. If we're going to recall Brenda, we should do a full accounting of what she's done with HOA funds." We talked strategy for a while longer. David had already drafted the recall petition and was planning to start collecting signatures over the weekend. We needed signatures from at least 51% of homeowners, which meant at least 13 out of the 25 homes. Saturday morning, I joined David, Margaret, and a few others in going door to door. Most people were receptive once they heard what was happening. Several had their own stories of harassment or unfair fines from Brenda. By noon, we had 15 signatures. At the 16th house, we got a door slammed in our faces. It was Patricia Moore, one of Brenda's close friends and a member of her inner circle. Through the closed door, we heard her on the phone. "They're trying to get signatures for a recall." "Yes, right now. What should I do?" We moved on to the next house. By the end of the day, We had 20 signatures, well over the required threshold. David said he'd submit the petition to the board and the management company that handled HOA administrative services. Sunday was quiet. I spent the day in my workshop, enjoying the solitude and the smell of sawdust. Around dinner time, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Is this Jason Newman?" a man's voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Webb. I'm calling regarding your complaint to the Postal Inspection Service about mail obstruction." My mouth went dry. "Yes, sir. Inspector Matthews has submitted her report and recommendation," Webb said. "Based on the evidence, we've decided to move forward with charges against Brenda Winters for willful obstruction of mail delivery under Title 18 United States Code, Section 1702. She'll be formally charged within the next week." "Okay," I said, not sure what else to say. "You may be called to testify at some point," Webb continued. "We'll keep you updated. In the meantime, avoid any contact with Miss Winters or her associates. If they attempt to contact you, document it and inform us immediately." "I will," I said. "Thank you." After he hung up, I sat down heavily on my workbench stool. This was really happening. Brenda was going to be charged with a federal crime. The woman who had tormented me for 3 years was finally going to face consequences. I called Walter to tell him the news. He let out a long whistle. "Federal charges, that's serious business." "I know," I said. "Part of me feels bad, but mostly I'm just relieved." "Don't feel bad," Walter said firmly. "She did this to herself. You tried to resolve it reasonably. She's the one who chose to be vindictive." The next evening was the regular monthly HOA board meeting. I arrived early and found the parking lot packed again. Apparently word had spread about the recall petition and the federal investigation. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. Brenda was already at the board table, looking defiant despite the tension in her shoulders. Thomas and Janet sat on either side of her, both looking uncomfortable. David Kumar sat in the front row with a briefcase. Brenda called the meeting to order at exactly 7. "Before we begin regular business, I want to address the malicious rumors that have been circulating," she said. "There is a coordinated effort by certain residents to undermine this board and destabilize our community. These residents have filed false complaints, harassed board members, and are now attempting an illegal recall." "The recall is perfectly legal," David said, standing up. "I have the signed petition here with signatures from 20 out of 25 homeowners. That's 80% of the community. Per the HOA bylaws, that triggers a mandatory recall vote within 30 days. He walked forward and handed the petition to Janet, who looked at it with wide eyes. "This is a lot of signatures," she said quietly. "Let me see that," Brenda demanded, snatching the papers. She flipped through them, her face getting redder with each page. "Some of these signatures are fraudulent. I don't believe Patricia would ever sign this." "Patricia didn't sign it," David said calmly. "But 20 others did, including Thomas." Everyone turned to look at Thomas, whose face had gone pale. "I'm sorry, Brenda," he said quietly, "but I think it's time for new leadership. The way you've been handling things, the federal investigation, it's too much. You signed the recall petition against me." Brenda's voice was dangerously quiet. "After everything I've done for this community." "You've done things to this community, not for it," Thomas said, finding some courage. "I'm sorry, but I can't support you anymore." Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're all traitors, every single one of you. I built this HOA from nothing. I maintained property values. I enforced standards when no one else would, and this is how you repay me." "You terrorized people," Margaret called out. You used your position to bully anyone who disagreed with you. I maintained order, Brenda shouted, by blocking mailboxes. Someone yelled, by stealing HOA funds. Another voice added, I never stole anything. Brenda's voice cracked. How dare you accuse me of that? Then explain where $40,000 went last year, David said. Because I've reviewed the financial records, and there's no documentation for a significant portion of expenditures. Those are administrative costs, Brenda said. I don't have to justify every penny to you people. Actually, you do, David said. You're managing other people's money. Transparency is required by law. Brenda grabbed her purse and coat. I don't have to listen to this. Janet, you're in charge. Good luck dealing with these people. She stormed toward the exit. Brenda, you can't just leave, Janet said. We have board business to conduct. I resign, Brenda said without turning around. Effective immediately. You're all on your own. The door slammed behind her. The room erupted in chaos. Some people were cheering. Others were talking loudly, and Janet and Thomas just sat at the table looking shell-shocked. David walked up to the board table. I move that we accept Miss Winter's resignation and vote to install interim leadership until a proper election can be held. I second that, Margaret said loudly. Janet looked around helplessly. I don't know the procedure for this. I do, David said. I've reviewed the bylaws extensively. In the event of a presidential resignation, the vice president assumes the role. Thomas, that's you. Thomas looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he nodded. Okay, I accept the responsibility temporarily, but I want to make it clear that I'm not interested in staying on long term. We need fresh blood on this board. Agreed, David said. I propose we schedule an emergency election for new board members within 60 days. Over the next hour, we held the most productive HOA meeting I'd ever attended. Thomas proved to be a reasonable leader when not under Brenda's thumb. We voted to freeze all HOA spending except essential services, pending a full financial audit. We voted to suspend all pending fines until they could be reviewed for legitimacy. And we voted to hire an independent management company to handle day-to-day operations so that no single person had unchecked authority. As people were filing out, several neighbors came up to thank me. You started this, Walter said. By standing up to her, you gave the rest of us courage. I just didn't want my mailbox blocked, I said. But I was smiling. 3 days later, on Thursday morning, I was having coffee when I saw police cars pull up in front of Brenda's house. Through my window, I watched as 2 men in suits walked up to her door. Brenda answered, and even from 3 houses away I could see her face go pale. They talked for a few minutes, then one of the men handed her some papers. She signed something, and they all got into separate cars and drove away. Walter called me 5 minutes later. Did you see that? I did, I said. That must have been her arraignment summons. The local news picked up the story that evening. A Traverse City woman has been charged with federal mail obstruction charges, the anchor reported. Brenda Winters, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, allegedly blocked a neighbor's mailbox with snow in retaliation for HOA disputes. If convicted, she faces up to 6 months in jail and fines up to $5,000. They showed a photo of Brenda, and then they cut to an interview with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Marcus Webb appeared on screen. Mail delivery obstruction is a serious federal crime, he said. The U.S. Postal Service is a vital public service, and those who interfere with it will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors who'd seen the news. Everyone wanted to know the full story. I gave them the basics, but tried to keep it short. I wasn't interested in gloating. I just wanted to move on with my life over the next few weeks. things in the neighborhood gradually stabilized. The independent management company took over HOA operations and proved to be professional and reasonable. They reviewed all the pending fines Brenda had issued and canceled about 60% of them as unwarranted or excessive. They set up a proper complaint process with checks and balances. David Kumar took the lead on the financial audit. He hired a forensic accountant who went through 5 years of HOA records with a fine-toothed comb. The results were worse than we thought. David called a special meeting to present the findings. Over the past 5 years, approximately $120,000 in HOA funds cannot be properly accounted for, he said, displaying a chart on a projection screen. Some of this may be due to poor record keeping, but a significant portion appears to have been diverted for personal use. He showed examples: HOA checks written to vendors that didn't exist, credit card charges at restaurants and stores that had no business connection to the community, and even a few checks written directly to Brenda for consulting fees that were never approved by the board. "This is embezzlement," Margaret said, stunned. "It appears to be," David agreed. "I've forwarded all of this information to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Michigan Attorney General's Office. This is beyond what we can handle as an HOA." 2 weeks later, Brenda faced additional charges: wire fraud and embezzlement of funds from an organization. Her husband, Richard, was also charged as an accomplice after investigators found that he'd helped her set up fake vendor accounts and had benefited from the stolen money. The case moved slowly through the federal court system. Brenda initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she'd done nothing wrong and that the HOA accounting was simply disorganized. But the evidence was overwhelming. Canceled checks, credit card statements, and bank records painted a clear picture of systematic theft over multiple years. In late March, about 10 weeks after my initial complaint about the mailbox, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to mail obstruction and 1 count of wire fraud. In exchange, the other charges were dropped, and Richard's charges were dismissed entirely. The sentencing hearing was in early May. I attended, sitting in the back of the federal courtroom in Grand Rapids. Brenda looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her lawyer gave a long speech about her contributions to the community, her lack of prior criminal record, and her deep remorse for her actions. The federal judge, a stern woman named Patricia Hartwell, was not impressed. "Miss Winters, you held a position of trust within your community," Judge Hartwell said. "You were elected to serve your neighbors, not to steal from them and harass them. Your actions with regard to Mr. Newman's mailbox were petty and vindictive. Your embezzlement of HOA funds was calculated and prolonged. These are not the actions of someone who made a mistake. These are the actions of someone who believed they were above the law." Judge Hartwell sentenced Brenda to 4 months in federal prison, followed by 6 months of home confinement and 2 years of supervised release. She also ordered Brenda to pay full restitution of $120,000 to the HOA, plus fines totaling $10,000. Brenda sobbed as the sentence was read. Her husband sat in the gallery with his head in his hands. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: satisfaction that justice had been served, but also some sadness at seeing another human being so thoroughly destroyed by their own actions. As I left the courthouse, I ran into Inspector Matthews in the hallway. "Thank you for following through on this," I said. "That's my job," she said. "But I want you to know that your complaint likely prevented this from continuing for years longer. People like Miss Winters don't stop on their own. They have to be stopped." "I'm just glad it's over," I said. "It's not quite over," Inspector Matthews said. She still has appeals rights and you might be called if she decides to fight it, but given that she took a plea deal, that's unlikely. Back in Traverse City, the neighborhood was thriving under new leadership. We held elections in April, and a completely new board was voted in. Margaret became president, David became vice president, and Walter agreed to serve as treasurer. I was asked to join the board but declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. The new board operated with transparency and common sense. They reduced the number of restrictive rules, focused on actual community needs like snow plowing and landscaping, and set up a reasonable fine structure for genuine violations. The monthly fees were reduced to $200 after the management company renegotiated service contracts. My mailbox was never blocked again. In fact, that winter, after a major snowstorm, 3 neighbors showed up at my house with shovels to help me clear my driveway without being asked. That's what a community was supposed to be. I ran into Janet Crawford at the grocery store in June. She looked relieved to see me. "Jason, I owe you an apology," she said. "I went along with Brenda's behavior for too long. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up." "We were all afraid," I said. "She was good at intimidation." "Still, I should have been braver," Janet said. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stood up to her. You saved this neighborhood." "I just didn't want my mail blocked," I said, and we both laughed. Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on my carpentry business, which was doing well. I started dating someone I met at a local coffee shop, a teacher named Grace Jenkins who had never heard of my HOA drama and didn't care about any of it. It was refreshing. In August, I got a letter from the HOA's insurance company. They'd settled a claim and were issuing refunds to all homeowners who had been victims of Brenda's improper fines. My check was for $800, covering all the bogus fines she'd hit me with over the years. It felt like the final piece of closure. Brenda served her 4 months at a minimum security federal facility in West Virginia. When she was released, she and Richard quietly sold their house and moved out of state. I heard through Walter that they went to Florida, trying to start over somewhere. No one knew their story. The community center got a plaque installed in the meeting room that fall. David had pushed for it, wanting a reminder of what we'd learned. It read, "A community thrives when leaders serve with integrity, when neighbors support each other, and when every voice has the right to be heard without fear of retaliation." It was a bit cheesy, but the sentiment was right. I was sitting on my porch on a cool October evening, watching the leaves change colors, when Walter came over with 2 beers. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful neighborhood sounds of kids playing and dogs barking. "You ever think about how different things would be if you just dug out your mailbox and said nothing?" Walter asked. "All the time," I admitted. "My life would have been simpler." "But the neighborhood would still be under her thumb," Walter said. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone." "I guess," I said. "I just wanted to get my mail." Walter laughed. "That's what makes it perfect. You weren't trying to be a hero. You just wanted basic human decency, and when you didn't get it, you followed the proper channels. That's how it's supposed to work." We clinked our beer bottles together and watched the sun set over Maple Ridge Drive. The street looked peaceful and well-maintained. New neighbors had moved into Brenda's old house, a young couple with twins who were already becoming part of the community fabric. Margaret stopped by the next morning with fresh muffins. "Board meeting tonight," she said. "Nothing dramatic, just budget review and planning for the holiday decorating contest." "Holiday decorating contest?" I asked. "We're doing that again?" "Yes, but this time it's voluntary and fun," Margaret said. "No fines for late removal, no mandatory participation, just neighbors celebrating together." "That sounds nice," I said. "You should come to the meeting anyway," Margaret said. "We're voting on a proposal to install a community mailbox cluster at the entrance to reduce individual mailbox maintenance. Might prevent future snow-related issues." I laughed. "I'll be there." That evening's board meeting was attended by maybe 10 people, a far cry from the standing room only chaos of months earlier. The business was conducted efficiently and professionally. The budget was approved unanimously. The holiday contest rules were established with input from everyone. The mailbox cluster proposal was discussed and tabled for further research. As I walked home after the meeting, I reflected on how much had changed. All because Brenda had decided to be petty about snow placement. All because I'd decided I wasn't going to just accept unreasonable treatment. The federal system had worked exactly as it was supposed to. I'd filed a legitimate complaint through proper channels. An inspector had investigated thoroughly and objectively. The evidence had been presented to prosecutors who'd made a fair assessment. The courts had rendered appropriate justice. And a community had been freed from tyranny in the process. It wasn't the outcome I'd expected when I woke up that cold January morning to find my mailbox buried. I just wanted to receive my mail. But sometimes small acts of resistance against small injustices lead to bigger changes. Carmen Rodriguez, my postal carrier, stopped me one afternoon as I was getting my mail. "I heard what happened with Miss Winters," she said. "I just want to say thank you. She made my job difficult for years, and no one ever did anything about it." "You filed reports too, didn't you?" I asked. "Many," Carmen said. "But without a homeowner willing to formally complain, there wasn't much that could be done. Your complaint gave the Postal Inspection Service the opening they needed." "Glad I could help," I said. "You did more than help," Carmen said. "You made it possible for me to do my job. That matters." As winter approached again, I made sure my snow removal equipment was in good shape. I bought a new shovel and had my snow blower serviced. When the first significant snowfall came in late November, I was outside at dawn, clearing my driveway and making sure there was a wide, clear path to my mailbox. Several neighbors were doing the same thing, and we helped each other out. It took about an hour to get everyone's driveways and mailbox areas clear. We finished with hot coffee in Walter's kitchen, laughing about something completely unrelated to HOAs or snow or any of the drama that had consumed us earlier in the year. That's what a real community looked like. People helping each other, not because they were forced to or fined if they didn't, but because it was the right thing to do. I never saw Brenda again after the sentencing hearing. Sometimes I wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience, if she regretted her actions, or if she blamed everyone else for her downfall. I hoped for her sake that she'd found some peace and perspective, but I didn't dwell on it. My life moved forward in good ways. My business expanded, and I hired an apprentice, a young guy fresh out of trade school who was eager to learn. Grace and I grew closer, and by Christmas, we were talking about moving in together. The neighborhood continued to thrive under reasonable leadership that actually served the community's interests. On the anniversary of the mailbox incident, Walter sent me a text, "Happy Freedom from Tyranny Day." I laughed and sent back a photo of my perfectly clear, easily accessible mailbox with the caption, "Living the Dream." It was a joke, but it was also true. Sometimes freedom is as simple as being able to receive your mail without harassment. Sometimes justice is as straightforward as following the proper channels and trusting the system to work. And sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest stands on principle. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that my voice mattered, and that doing the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable or uncertain, is always worth it. I learned that there are systems in place to protect citizens from abuse of power, and those systems work when people are brave enough to use them. Most importantly, I learned that a community is only as strong as its willingness to stand up against bullies and support each other through difficult times. Maple Ridge Drive was stronger now, not because we'd defeated an enemy, but because we'd reclaimed our right to live peacefully in our own homes without fear. My mailbox stood clear and accessible, a small monument to the idea that sometimes the most mundane frustrations can lead to the most important victories. Every time I collected my mail, I thought about that cold January morning and smiled. It had been a long journey from a pile of snow to federal charges to community transformation, but it had been worth every difficult moment. I was home, truly home, in a neighborhood that finally felt like a real community. And my mail always got delivered on time.